The Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute would like to thank Dell Technologies for sponsoring the CHCI-Dell PolicyHack on the digital divide. Dell Technologies has continued to support and invest in the Latino community and has generously dedicated their time and resources to encourage policies and practices that address the digital divide and economic injustices impacting the Latino community in the U.S. Thank you, Dell Technologies, for making this hackathon possible.
Welcome back to our PolicyHack participants, and welcome everyone to the CHCI-Dell PolicyHack. I'm Lourdes Diaz-Hurtado from Dell Government Affairs. In the past hour, our participants have been hacking on solutions to policy issues focused on the digital divide and how technology can be leveraged to address economic injustice, racial bias in technology, health access inequities, and workforce readiness that are impacting the Latino communities in the U.S. And yes, you heard that right. They only had 1 hour to come up with these solutions. So what is a Dell Policy Hack? A policy hack is an interactive hackathon where teams of citizens, policymakers, industry leaders come together to design a solution to policy challenges. Before we get started, we would like to introduce our judges panel. Joining us today, we have Ed Loya, who's the Senior Vice President of Human Resources for Dell's Corporate Service Functions and a CHCI board member. We have Christine Godinez, President of CHASA and Legislative Assistant for Congresswoman Dina Titus of Nevada. We also have Alma Costa, Executive Director of the CHC, and Noel Candelaria, Secretary-Treasurer of National Education Association. Welcome, judges. We're happy to have you here and to have our teams present their new policy hack ideas. So the way that this format will go is that teams will present for 5 minutes and will be followed by a 5-minute Q&A session by the judges. The team's solution will be judged on the following criteria. First, how is their idea novel or different? Second, how will it be adopted? And third, how does the solution scale? After the teams pitch their idea, the judges will actually have 5 minutes to deliberate and pick a winner. Now, before we get started, I'll be keeping time to make sure everyone has their 5 minutes to pitch and the Q&A session for the judges. So to kick it off, let's hand it off to team one. We have Thomas, who's going to present their pitch today. So Thomas, if you can start sharing your screen.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, judges, for being here. My name is Thomas Franco. I'm a proud CHCI alumnus, and I'm here representing my team, Team One, which is focusing on access to technology and hoping to close the digital divide. I'm here representing my team comprised of Josue Rivera, Abel Ramos, and Jay, and Luis Marin. And we spent the last hour thinking a lot about our issue, which is focusing on access to technology. We know that the COVID pandemic has had disproportionate effects on our Black and Brown communities. And we know that this has led to a lot of issues for our community being able to access learning for our students, right? For folks to be able to work from home, and really preventing a whole host of pathways to opportunity that we know the digital divide creates here. And we know that this has effects on economic mobility and on equity. So as we were thinking about our solution for this, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping equity top of mind, that we were presenting a novel idea for you, and that we were able to do something that was feasible and scalable. In thinking about the digital divide, we know that access really comes in two ways, and that is through access to technology itself, the devices that our communities will use to access these opportunities, but also access to internet, right? And having the infrastructure in place and just having access to the internet itself has been a big issue. We know that ultimately this leads to the access in knowledge. And we wanted to think along the lines of existing infrastructure and opportunities that are expanding currently, things like 5G, where we know that companies like Verizon are rolling out, and other companies who have in recent years been trying to roll this out. And we know that there's increasing money going toward closing the rural divide, but also thinking along the lines of how this issue presents itself in urban communities. And so ultimately, we came up with a few ideas that we think will be able to tackle this problem. The first being to think along the lines of existing systems like social welfare, where we might be able to target some families who specifically are in need. And think about this along the lines of food stamps per se, but for digital devices. And this would specifically be helping us to tackle the issue of access to technology by using pathways that are already existent and building this into application systems that folks are already accessing. We'll be able to help them secure these devices. Now, we wanted to think along the lines of a circular economy and not be wasteful. We didn't want folks having to go out to buy brand new technology. So we wanted to work with private companies to build in an opportunity for them to use recycled and repaired hardware that would be available to anyone who is eligible with these quote unquote food stamps for devices. And so this would we would also roll out government subsidies, tax breaks, and these opportunities for companies to be incentivized to partake in this program and this initiative for connecting our communities with devices. The other part of this, as we know, is access to internet itself. And we wanted to think along the lines of what do our communities already have access to? As we know, a lot of Black and Brown families have access to smartphones, but they don't necessarily have more than one computer or even a computer at all. And so what we wanted to do was turn that smartphone into an opportunity for them to have access to internet for the laptops that we're connecting them, or the devices we're connecting them with in our other portion, which was the recycling program. And so we are presenting the opportunity for subsidies to carriers to create mobile hotspots. That is, to allow them to use their existing smartphones to provide the internet for the devices that we're hoping to connect them with. We would use funding from a variety of sources, thinking along the lines of state and local governments also subsidizing, as well as the federal government bringing this up in pending stimulus package that we know is currently being worked out on the Hill. And so we truly believe that by providing access to internet through these hotspots, and also providing access to technology by offering pathways for those who really are at a need here to have access to recycled or repaired hardware, that we'll be able to close the digital divide and provide the opportunities for our students to learn, right? For our families to access opportunities to work online, and really close this digital divide that we know is presenting itself both into rural and urban communities. We know that there are significant challenges in connecting our undocumented families as well. And so we're hoping to be able to work with them in alternative ways. We know that that it can create barriers when we use systems that are already in place, like welfare systems that aren't as accessible to the undocumented community. And we would do that by leveraging our partnerships with community resource centers, with schools, and even churches, right? Along the same lines of how we try to get access to healthcare for our communities, we would do the same with this program and this initiative in connecting partners that are trustworthy.
Thank you, Thomas. I think that you're at 5 minutes, so thank you so much for your presentation. And then we'll move to the 5 minutes for the Q&A from the judges. Judges, do you have any questions for Thomas and Team 1?
I have a question. Besides food stamps, as an example, do you know if there's other programs that there's precedent that we could also look to for this idea?
Sure. So I think traditionally what has been done in terms of trying to get devices out, right, which is what the food stamp program would be doing. Historically, we've leaned on nonprofits that are specifically focused on getting recycled hardware out. There's also libraries who hold their own getting recycled. But in trying to present a novel approach, it's kind of this broader scheme, so to say. We wanted to provide an opportunity for folks to go to something that they know, or maybe they already are interacting with, or if they're not, then an opportunity to use trustworthy resources to connect them to that. We want it to be as broad as possible so that we could reach a lot of communities.
Ed, did you have a question?
Yeah. So Team One, again, first, thanks for the presentation and the thoughts, the leadership on this. Regarding recycling and refurbished technology, what's your thought in terms of, if you think about the digital divide and you think about kind of the technology turns and how quickly technology becomes out of date or obsolete? Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts around that in terms of using refurbished technology to ensure that people that don't have access to current technology don't fall even further behind, given that the technology might be dated or not able to do a lot of the things that they may be asked to do in terms of workloads?
Right. Yeah, we definitely thought about that aspect. And, it definitely is a concern, but I think in terms of thinking about the most immediate needs right now, I think it's important that we have programs in place to meet those immediate needs. And those would namely be what we identified were access to basic internet, to broadband internet, and to be able to complete, basic tasks that would be required for school, for instance, for our students to engage in that. So while we definitely don't want to create an issue where folks are falling even more behind, we also don't want to leave them hanging in this current moment of need.
Okay, thanks.
I think Noel has a question.
Thank you, Tomas, and thank you for your team. I thought you all, kind of really, did a good job of thinking about kind of the short-term immediate. I'm wondering if your team talked about, as you were talking about the short-term immediate, how that would then bridge to more long-term, sustainable, and really kind of permanently connecting the gap, right? And just kind of looking at the current infrastructure and how, we then, take this to then be able to bridge so that systemically across the board, access is more permanent and systemic across the board.
Right. Yeah, we definitely wanted to think more kind of long term and consider how that might that's also something we want to tackle. I mean, I think in this immediate 1 hour, we were kind of thinking more what do we need right now, and kind of in terms of the pandemic. We did come across brainstorm some ideas, thinking along the infrastructure itself, because the issue is kind of defined in two ways, right? In rural communities, we think about a lack of infrastructure as the pressing issue, whereas in urban communities, a lot of the times it's the affordability piece. And so those require two different solutions for long term, right? And so we thought about everything from launching satellite infrastructure for providing widespread access. But I think, to other programs that we thought of, but I think really what it comes down to is having the government look at this as a public utility, right? And I think while our solution tackles the medium term, what it does allow is folks to become connected, right? And we know that empowering people with access to knowledge and access to connectivity, right, is what allows these portions of advocacy for these bigger scale initiatives, right? And so, long term, we would like to see communities build more infrastructure in rural areas, and also to have the government subsidize or, be able to lower prices of internet and devices in urban communities and across America. But for the medium term, this is what we are going with.
Thanks, Tomas. I think we have our 5 minutes up questions for the judges. So to give everyone the fair chance, we'll move on to Team 2 to start their pitch. I think we have Team 2 is Ryan Kim, if you can start sharing your screen.
Yeah, so we are Team 2, Brianne Roberts, Gavino Pina, and Ryan Kim. So we were tasked with racial bias, and especially how this applies to emerging technologies such as AI, big data, and AI and big data. How to tackle implicit racial, gender, and ideological biases, because there's no doubt that AI is an integral part of our lives, and I don't think anyone doubts how useful the technology is to everyday applications, but we need to recognize that there are pitfalls and downfalls to the technology because it contains implicit racial, gender, and ideological biases. And our solution focuses on being able to tackle these issues to an extent. So what our solution revolves around is it centrally revolves around using neural networks, which is a subset of AI, but which also drives AI to filter potential employees, demographic / irrelevant data in HR and recruiting. So we can filter for viewing skills, education, work history for open job roles. So we are trying to create a neural network system that tries to mitigate this inherent bias. So the next slide is going to explain to an extent how that will work. So right here we have figure 1, which displays a simplified version of a neural network. So if I can give you guys a general kind of overview of neural networks first. First, we have the input layer, which goes through the intermediate layers called the black box. And then in the end, we have an output layer, which are the results. So that's just like the general overview of neural networks. We have an input, they go through a series of calculations in the intermediate stages, and then we get the output result that we want. So how does this apply to our situation specifically? So for us, the input layer, each individual module, each individual circle is going to be an applicant, is going to be someone's resume. And what the intermediary stages, the black box, is going to do is they're gonna usually they would take into account of all features and all factors. So that includes irrelevant demographic factors. But what we want is we want to mask them. We want features such as demographic, racial characteristics to not be part of the equation, and then get an output layer which tries to mitigate these inherent biases. Now, how does that work? So neural network itself works on an algorithm called backpropagation. What backpropagation is essentially using iterations of its previous results to refine the results so that we get output that we want. Its backpropagation is so if I may give you guys a simple explanation, it's like when you're taking a shower, if the water is too hot, you turn the faucet back a bit, and if the water is too cold, you turn the faucet forward a bit. So that's essentially what backpropagation is, using the final results as previous iterations to continuously refine your data. So what does that mean for us? So we have the input layer, which are individual applicants. We use backpropagation algorithm to kind of filter out these results, and all of these, so the applications, the biases, they're all going to be represented as numerical data. They're all going to be numerical representations, and then ultimately we're going to have a numerical representation of racial bias. Let's say one being the data is completely ridden with racial or other bias, and 10 is the numerical representation. 10 means we have mitigated the racial bias to an extent. So 10 being the best and a 1 being the worst in terms of racial bias. So once we put the applicants to the input layer, and then we put them through the data applicants in the input layer goes through backpropagation in the intermediate layers, and then we get the output layer we get the results in the output layer. What we're going to do is we're going to get constant numerical output, and then based on that, if the racial bias is within a certain numerical error margin, we're going to refine our data results based on that error margin and based on that data. So that's essentially that's the general overview of how neural networks are going to be implemented in our situation.
Brian, you have 30 seconds left.
So in terms of scalability, so IT programmers can, how will this be adapted? IT programmers can mask the data, and leaders can, train and trickle communication down throughout the company by using Dell Learning Studio lessons. And how will this scale? So first of all, scale education for HR recruiter implementation, and then scaling the collaboration between AR and HR teams for developing is important, but giving back to younger generations and helping correct earlier is also very important. And passing best practices to schools with our AI training to redirect racial bias is ultimately the goal. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so now we'll open to Q&A from the judges.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, Team 2. A lot of work is being done right now in industry around this particular topic of how do you filter out bias in the processes that you have, not only from a recruitment standpoint, but from a variety of other things within organizations. My question is, in terms of its scalability and the variety of different technologies that are being brought to bear today that organizations use, HR organizations, engineering organizations, et cetera, to support customers. How, there's multiple different systems. How do you start to assess through your process, where there might be, unconscious bias, racial biases, but beyond just the application process? Because I think the application process is one, but this transcends across a variety of different disciplines and a variety of different programs and technologies within a modern company. Have you thought through that?
So the neural network part is kind of a secondary solution to our primary kind of public policy solution. So what that means is, since neural networks are so dependent, the output results are so dependent on the input results, our focus was being able to refine the input results in the first place and make sure the input results themselves are kind of devoid, or not completely devoid, but at least to an extent devoid of inherent bias. And what my teammates were talking about is fixing those input results by using Dell Learning Studio to help HR recruiters, acknowledge and recognize racial bias. So when we put their input bias into the system, the whole neural network system is beneficial in mitigating racial bias. So that's what we kind of talk about.
So Ryan, this is really more around the recruitment cycle then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
Brian, I had a question about how this would work in terms of when you have folks applying, what kind of information is required for them to submit into the system? I imagine it would be a system of sorts that would be used to screen. I understand screening out, for example, names, but would you require folks to submit racial or ethnic information? Would the system then screen based on, say, the use of keywords or something like that, which if not everybody is aware of what keywords are needed for that particular job or industry, how would you fix that? What do you think about that side of things?
So in terms of how those characteristics are going to factor into the system, so like I said, first of all, this is obviously this is more general than specific because we don't have like an actual specific system in place. But what we are thinking of is, like I said, representing those characteristics as numerical values. And so it's not like we're taking out data that wouldn't. So inherent racial bias is definitely not good, but it's not like we can just take out that data in the first place, because they are still part of the data. So what the neural network that we have in mind determines is this data relevant to our recruiting process? And ultimately, demographic and racial data ultimately is not really particularly significant in picking applicants when it comes down to their skills and abilities, right? So basically what we are thinking of is when they are numerically represented, data such as their skills, their qualification, their certifications, whatever it may be, that's ranked higher in the system than demographic or racial data. And because of that numerical data, when the data output comes up with like an error margin, that's gonna take into account of like the racial inherent bias that's calculated, and ultimately we're going to get applicants that are more qualified and where racial bias isn't calculated into the system. Does that make any sense? So basically using numerical representation to rank applicants, but that simultaneously also kind of mitigates inherent racial bias, because inherent racial bias is deemed as insignificant according to the calculations.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Thanks, judges, for the questions. I think our 5 minutes are up, so we'll have Team 3 start presenting. I think our team lead is Gina Cano.
Yes, Gina Cano. I am a director of business operations here at Dell. Been here for 16 years. And I had the pleasure of working with Cynthia, Gabriella, Naomi, and Jennifer, Team 3, talking about education. Not just anything in education, specifically around the policies that we could do to put in place to eliminate the digital divide in regards to education and create opportunities for digital learning for all students. I'm sure you've seen the news, internet memes, or on your social feeds, the 2 little girls sitting in front of Taco Bell trying to do their homework because they didn't have access to broadband at home, right? That's stuck in my head, and I'm optimistic that's stuck in your head, and it should infuriate you and get you frustrated. Why? Why is that the case? Why is it that some students have it and others don't have it? Well, that's the policy we wanted to put in place. So as I was talking with my teammates and looking through everything, one thing stood out to us. The reason this happens and the reason this continues to happen is technology is always put last. We're more focused on investing money into, athletic programs, or let's say, I don't know, school or something along, not just school, but athletic programs, football stadiums. Heck, we saw a school district that built a water park, right? Could you imagine if all that money was put into technology? So the policy we want to put in there and what we want to put into place is that we need to lead with technology first. Technology cannot be an afterthought. Technology cannot be something we put on the back burner and, if we have some money left over, here you go, Mr. or Miss IT person, go see what you can do with this. It needs to be on the forefront. If we're going to increase the digital fluency of our communities, the digital fluency of our students, and have the digital literacy that they need to be successful in the 21st and 22nd century, we have to start with technology first. I would say a minimum of 25% of the budget needs to go to technology. Again, can't be an afterthought. It needs to be in the front of the conversation. So the policies need to be written that technology is going to be the primary or the front end of the budget that's allocated to them. Then we need to divide the budget with lower income schools getting a priority. You might stop and say, wait, I moved to this neighborhood. I pay taxes because I want my child to have the best, and I don't want to lose the money we're putting in here to go over there. We have an idea for that. But, we also need to make sure that we're not just doing a peanut butter spread and putting it for everybody, that we need to help those that are underprivileged, those that tend to be on the lower end of things, and give them that opportunity. Tech companies need to be taxed. So you've heard policies and there's things in place, incentives. Hey, Mr. Tech Company, we're not going to tax you to come do business here. Okay, maybe we won't tax you as much, but we still need to put a tax in that's going to assist with technology funding. Again, we appreciate nonprofits helping. We appreciate companies trying to give a little bit here, give a little bit there. We need to make it a standard. This needs to be a policy that if you're in tech, you get to help the community you're in by giving tech and giving dollars to help fund the tech. And any excess funding in the policy that needs to be written, any excess funding that may be available as a part of the budget needs to go back into technology, whether it's tech scholarships, additional equipment. So Ed, you asked a question when Team 1 was talking about how do we keep the technology fresh? How do we keep it relevant? How do we keep them from having outdated? Well, excess funds go into tech. We keep refreshing. There's a lot of programs. In fact, at Dell, we have a recycling program that we can give you credit. So give us our old, we'll give you credit for the new. But we can't do that if we don't have the funding for it up front. Another question that was brought in here that you asked, one of the judges asked, is this short-term, long-term? This would be long-term. This would be feeding in, because the budget is there for the investments that need to happen. So how will this be adapted? Well, funding is going to be a combination of local and federal taxing, right? Nobody likes the word tax. I don't like it, you don't like it, but it's how we run business. It's how we run our cities, our states, our country. It's a part of how we get things done. It's where we get the money. So we need to have a combination. So if we do it at a local level of, Dell or Google or Facebook or Snapchat, TikTok, any of these companies, these tech companies that are operating there, they put in a 1% into the community. That puts it into a pool. We have a whole lot more that we can distribute. So answering that first question, well, I moved to this subdivision and I'm paying taxes. I want my money to stay in my school. Great. Let's tax the tech companies so that way you keep your money there, and then we can put a little bit more to the places that don't have that same tax rate. Tech companies need to help with the development of STEM lesson plans. I don't know about you, but since my son has been virtual learning and I'm looking at his curriculum, it's a little dated. We need to have technology leading. So if we want to have the neural networks, we want to have AI, we want to do machine learning, we got to start teaching that now. Because if we wait, we're going to already be behind. We need the equipment.
Gina, you got 30 more seconds. Sorry.
All right, I'll finish it up here. So we got to, I can talk for days. So the equipment, right? So let's make it reusable, with sustainable, with solar and wind power. So how does this scale? We invest in tech, we develop our people. We develop our people, it comes back into the community. With the community, we have more tech come in, keeps developing our people. That's how we get this to scale. That's how we get it to expand. And that's why we need to lead with tech first and put policies in place that will do that. And with that,
thank you. Thank you so much, Gina. I love the enthusiasm. I love it. Awesome. And judges, do we have any questions for Team 3?
Don't be shy.
All right.
Noel, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. Good job on kind of the thoughtfulness of, getting folks, especially I really like the part about, the responsibility of corporations to invest, that we all have. But, of course, as a teacher, as an educator that's intimately, engaged and familiar with district budgets and how they function and how they work, and the fact that 80% of current district budgets go to personnel because we're in the business of people, so 80% of the budget is invested in its people. So, but also knowing that, I guess my question is, how do we get funds into communities that don't have tech companies in their communities? And because I know a lot of your focus was on, getting the tech companies in those communities to invest at 1%, but there's a lot of communities, especially communities of color, that don't have tech companies in there. And so how do you see that working?
That's why we need to do this at a federal level, right? We do it at a federal level, then we level out the playing field, right? Because you're right. Not every community has a Google, a Facebook, or a Dell at their disposal in their back door. Right. So if you do it at a federal level, that's where you're going to be able to have that ability to then have it where you have it in urban areas or areas in Mississippi, or you have them like in my hometown of Beeville, Texas, down south. We've got 2 prisons there. Not the most tech savvy place, right? So, but if we do it at a federal level, that's how we level out the playing field.
Emma has a question.
Regarding the 25% budget, would you provide guidance as to how to allocate that budget? Like how much should go towards technology? How much should go to hardware? Are you planning to issue some guidance? Was there a discussion about that?
Well, I'll use an analogy that I used with my team and I use often, right? Before you start picking the paint colors of a house, you got to lay the foundation, right? So your initial investment is going to be on the infrastructure that you need, right? So a large percentage based on the need would go towards infrastructure, followed by all the applications, right? So if we want to use things such as Learning Studio, if we want to use items that would help build a curriculum to learn the data science or any machine learning, that application have to be there. So at first you might have a 80-20, right? And as maybe the next year, then we go to a 70-30, then it's 50-50, and then it'll shift to the applications, right? But you're always going to have something for the infrastructure. And if we go through a cloud-based kind of approach towards this, the infrastructure is always going to be fresh. It's always going to be there. You'll just pay for licensing. So it really depends on how we tackle this. But at the end of the day, I would say the initial investment is going to be on the hardware that's necessary to do that, followed by, shifting over then to the applications.
Great. Any other questions from the judges for Team 3? Going once, going twice. Okay, no questions for Team 3. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all the teams to present and taking the time to do that. Just as the policy hackers only had an hour to come up with these solutions, judges, you also will be under a 5-minute time crunch to decide the winning team. So Marcella, you can help me put the judges into a breakout room and they'll be deliberating.
We put together teams of entrepreneurs, investors, policymakers, corporate innovation people, and they hack that challenge, they pitch, and then the best solution is the one that wins.
The winning team of the Policy Hack will actually get more work because we intend to enact the winning idea and incubate it over a 12 to 18-month period.
Through the Policy Hack in 2017, with this entrepreneurship education idea, we worked through private-public partnerships, including Dell Foundation, to develop Emprende Héroes. We helped implement the program at the schools to help develop these young entrepreneurs.
We put policymakers in an agile, dynamic environment that typically startups find themselves in.
There are a number of areas of alignment between Dell and the government. Emerging technologies is one of them. We have a huge interest, as does the government, in effectively and efficiently providing services to the population at large.
To come here and get a chance to see a large Fortune 500 company here in Las Cruces is great. They provide so much information to us and allows us to really expand a lot of our thinking.
Estamos promoviendo el desarrollo de nuevos proyectos con tecnología. Estamos apoyando a nuestro país. Es bien importante el compromiso que tiene Dell EMC México.
During the Policy Hack, most of the ideas were not asking for incentives from the government, but the allowance to implement projects that will go across several areas of the public organization, tackling some of the social issues we have in our country.
I love this initiative of the Dell Hack. It has changed me as a person.
You feel enriched, you feel part of a big platform, and your ideas are being honored.
If companies like Dell partner with the schools, we would really take this project forward.
With these initiatives, you feel alive again. You're thinking about new solutions, which is just perfect for the new world that we're going to build.
Great. I see the judges trickling in, coming back from their deliberation. Just like the teams had 60 minutes, you guys had 5 to judge to see who's our winner today. So Ed, you can announce who our winner is for the CHCI-Dell Policy Hack.
Thanks, Lourdes. First and foremost, thanks to all the team, to put the thought leadership around some very complex, sticky, convoluted, items. And again, just read anything in the news today around these areas. There are the best minds in the world, trying to grapple with this. And I would argue that some of the best minds on this conference call are at par with it. So first and foremost, and then to do it within an hour. So hats off to all of you guys around that. And so between myself, Noel, Christine, and Alma, we've got a unanimous decision, and for a variety of different reasons. One, the novelness of the idea. Two, it is something that is absolutely critical that technology does get to the people that need it the most as quickly as we can. And three, using the current infrastructure that it's either at the state level or the federal level or the local level to not create a net new and to use those railways in order to kind of implement this. And so we give our hats, take our hats off to all three teams, but team number one is unanimous from all four of our judges today.
Thank you so much, and congratulations, Team 1. That's awesome. Great presentation. Thank you so much to all the judges who joined us today. Thank you also for the participants who also spent the time to come up with these amazing ideas. We'll be reaching out to you after this policy hack to follow up. Thank you so much for joining.
The Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute would like to thank Dell Technologies for sponsoring the CHCI-Dell PolicyHack on the digital divide. Dell Technologies has continued to support and invest in the Latino community and has generously dedicated their time and resources to encourage policies and practices that address the digital divide and economic injustices impacting the Latino community in the U.S. Thank you, Dell Technologies, for making this hackathon possible.